All right, welcome everybody to the Wattsman Diesel House world headquarters, i.e. my basement. So today I wanted to look at something that a lot of people say that they want and a lot of people say that they do, but I've come to find out that a lot of people actually don't do. Today we're going to be talking about auditing logs, and I know what you're thinking. Auditing, fantastic. Where do we sign up? Sounds like a great word. I love the word auditing, but you know, in reality, a lot of people don't do it. And I've come to realize that a lot of people don't do it because a lot of people don't really know exactly how to do it. So what I want to do today is kind of walk you through a couple logs that I have audited or that I will audit here, and kind of show you my process on how to do it and what you should be looking for, because there's times that you'll audit a log or you'll look at a log and you'll say, well, it looks good. There's no glaring violations. In fact, the program might even say that there's no violations, but there actually might be some. And there's just a couple other things to watch out for. Some things that the logs need that you'll need to keep an eye on. And so that's what I want to kind of walk through today. So without further ado, I've got a couple logs here pulled up, and at the end I'll show you kind of why it's important to keep an eye on logs. So anyways, so here's a log that we've got, and you'll see right away that there's some red in it. And obviously with red, that means violation. And you can even see in there's 11-hour driving limits, 14-hour shift limit, and even a 70-hour limit. So this driver has been driving a ton and hasn't really been taking the proper breaks that he should be. However, this driver, I know, is on an exemption right now. So he's hauling fuel out in a state that has an exemption going on where he can haul fuel and he doesn't necessarily have to abide by the normal rules of the road. So as you can see here, he's got a couple things in the notes section on the far right side. It says post-trip inspection, pre-trip inspection, and he threw in there fuel exempt. Now, I like to tell the guys that whenever they put driving, and you'll see on the top there, when they're in driving, they're in red. They're in violation technically according to this logbook. I always like to tell the guys that if you're driving and you're in an exempt status, put a note in the driving section that says fuel exempt. Now I know he's got it there in the note section for the one, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And I think what happened with this guy is that a lot of times these guys will they'll let the program put them into driving. So if you go above 5 miles an hour, or some of them are if you go more than a quarter mile or something like that, there's always like a trigger with these that will put these guys into driving status. And I'm assuming that's what this happened to this guy. And so because of that, he doesn't have any notes in the driving sections. Now he does have notes for other things, loading or unloading stop number 2, when he's on duty. That's great. But I like to tell the guys, just out of caution, it's always a good idea to put a note in the driving section, especially when you're under the fuel exempt, because a DOT officer could look at that and he probably won't, but he could look at that and go, you don't have a reason why you're driving a violation, even though it says fuel exempt in there. He could do something. Probably won't, but he could. So I was like, let's be safe rather than sorry. And so then if we continue on with that, then we can look down and see at the bottom there, he's got the log form. So again, he's got the driver name. I've blurred some of this stuff out so for some privacy issues, but he's got his driver name, vehicle. The bottom on the log form there looks pretty good. Even in the shipping documents, he's got the commodity that he's hauling, the BOL number on there as well, and fuel exempt. So that's good. That's what he should have on there. This log, other than glaring red up there, actually isn't as bad as it may seem because he is in the exemption category. But what I would tell the driver is when you're doing your driving thing, just put fuel exempt. It's just that simple. It takes 10 seconds, unless you're a bad typer, then it might take you 15 seconds. But put fuel exempt in there, and that will just kind of leave all doubts out there. So not too bad, just a couple little pieces there. Even though it looks horrific, it's actually not too bad. So let's move on to the next log here. So this is going to be kind of an interesting one. So this guy is off duty. He's at home. And he has used his vehicle for personal conveyance purposes. Now, personal conveyance is a massive piece that a lot of people abuse. And I don't want to say abuse, but they think they're doing it right, but they're not. And so that's one thing that you really have to be careful about with personal conveyance, because technically, if you want to get really technical on this thing, personal conveyance, so let's say you deliver a load and you're going home after that. You deliver the load, it's off, you got an empty trailer, you're going to deadhead home. You cannot use personal conveyance to go home, because that is still technically part of the trip. So if you want to get really technical on this, personal conveyance is really tricky. But so if you could see up at the top there, he's got some gray lines, but he's also got a couple little green spots in there too, where he has used personal conveyance. And he did actually a very good job with his logs here explaining that he was on personal conveyance, going to a doctor's appointment, and he was bobtailing. So this is actually legitimate use of personal conveyance. He's literally using that semi-truck for his own personal use. He's not hauling anything. He's not even pulling a trailer on that one. So he has done his logs actually very well. And this is actually a very good example of personal conveyance and how to use it and when to use it. And even down at the bottom there, we could see in the log form, he's got his vehicle number, the distance he drove. He even put in the shipping documents, not available because he's bobtailing. And even in the assets, he's put bobtail. So this is actually a very good example of what a personal conveyance log should look like. There shouldn't be this massive driving line, or I shouldn't say, there can be, but typically what you see in a personal conveyance is you'll have this big driving line, and then all of a sudden they go to personal conveyance for like 2 hours. That is going to be a massive red flag to any DOT officer, and he will definitely be looking into that for abuse of the personal conveyance. But this is a great example of personal conveyance. So now so this log is good. Now we'll move on to the next log here. So this is a typical log. This is, like a guy driving. This is kind of typical what they see. Now this is a shorter driving day, and I don't know exactly why, but this is, the driver only drove for what, 5, 6, 7 hours in there, something like that. So he could do more, but it says right, 7 hours, almost 7 hours. He could do more, but for some reason he only went 7 hours. Okay, that's fine. Now on the far right side, you'll see in the notes section there, yard move. So this is kind of a new thing. It's been around for some time, but a lot of people don't use it. But this driver is one of our guys that does use it. And again, with yard moves, you have to be kind of careful with those. You have to make sure that you're properly in a yard. And typically they'll want, the definition of a yard is somewhere that has gates around it, so it doesn't have a lot of access to it. You have to go through a guard shack to do it. But yard move is a real thing. Now he only used it for 29 seconds, so I'm not entirely sure what he did. He might have been pulling out of a dock. I don't know, but he has a yard move on there. And now keep in mind too that if you do use a yard move, it's different than personal conveyance in that personal conveyance will leave you off duty. A yard move will put you on duty. So yard moves are technically considered on duty, non-driving, because they're just assuming that you're driving around some yard at a DC or even in the the home terminal yard. So he put the yard move in there, puts him on duty, which is fine, just as long as you know that you're going to be on duty. And then he's got the daily inspection, he calls it, pre-trip. So this is a pretty good log. Now, if we move down to the bottom of the log, we see where this is a problem. And sometimes you won't notice this, or the program won't tell you this, so you have to go look for this kind of stuff. Now, the log form looks good. He's got his name, he's got his truck number, the distance he drove that day, where he's going. I mean, he's filled this thing out right. He's got the shipping docks in there, route number 31, not quite sure what that means, but he's got some shipping docks in there. However, he is missing his driver signature. And that is a pretty big piece that DOT officers will look for, is the driver signature. And you could even see in the description of it, I certify that these entries are true and correct. The driver's signature finalizes the log for that day. And we know that his log was done because if we go back up, he was off duty. He went to off duty there for 10 hours. So we know he was done with that. So you want to make sure that you have your drivers sign their logs, because that certifies them, that finalizes them out, and it's necessary. It's a requirement to do so. Now you'll also notice back up here that he went to off duty. So now we need to make sure that he was at home and not actually in the sleeper berth, because that's another thing DOT officers will look for is are they at home or are they in the sleeper berth? Because off duty and sleeper berth are completely different things, but a lot of times drivers will intermix them, and that's not right. You should not do that, because DOT officers will have their ways to finding out if you're actually in the sleeper berth but rode off duty. I have heard of DOT officers asking for hotel receipts. Okay, it gets to that point where they want to make sure that you were not in the sleeper berth. And if you cannot produce a hotel receipt proving that you weren't in your sleeper berth but you were off duty, then I've heard of them writing up violations for that, for falsifying logs. So just make sure that you're aware, and make sure that the driver's aware if they're using off duty versus sleeper berth. Okay, so that's a big thing. So we'll go back down here again. So make sure that the driver signs the document or the log at the end. So here is another log, big off-duty time. I think he was probably coming out of the house, has a little driving time, but the thing that and then he goes into sleeper berth. So now the reason that I would contact this driver on this log is you'll see there he did an 8-minute pre-trip inspection. Okay, little quick, but to each their own. However, he went into the sleeper berth then. There's no post-trip inspection. Now, I know that a post-trip inspection isn't necessarily required per se, but it is always a very good idea to do at the very least, a quick walk around the trailer. Because one of the big things that happens, and one of the major violations that a lot of drivers get hit for is brake lights out or trailer lights out of any kind. They call them operable lamps. And if you have a light out, that is a violation. And it's one of the major ones out there. It's one of the most common violations that guys get. And so it's always a great idea to just do a walk around before you get into the sleeper berth, before you go off duty, before you take your 10 hours off. Do a post-trip inspection. And so that's why what I would tell this driver is make sure that you do that post-trip, just to make sure that you don't have any leaks, you don't have any lights out, just to make sure the seals are intact in the back. So much can happen on those interstates out there that you just want to be careful. So just do a quick walk around. Just give me a little bit of post-trip inspection. Also, once we scroll down here, we could see, now this program has pointed it out, that he's missing his shipping documents. So shipping documents are BOL numbers, the BOL or the manifest numbers that the shipper gives you, or it could be the commodity and the loading location. So you can do either one of those. But this guy's missing that, and those are required for the log. So he would need to go put his shipping documents in, and as well, he didn't sign the logs either. So that's another thing that I would talk to him about. Say, hey, go back, edit your logs, put the shipping documents in. Sometimes they forget. I get it. It's sometimes you get loaded and you just want to get going. But make sure you put the shipping documents in, and at the end of the day, make sure that your driver signs the logs, because those are equally as important. So why am I telling this? Why are we going over auditing logs? Why do companies want that to happen? Well, because of this right here. This is two violations that I found, and you'll see that false report of driver record of duty status. Now, I know in both of these cases, the driver was driving under personal conveyance when he actually was loaded and pulling towards the receiver. So he got hit for false report. Now, these are different drivers, but they both got hit for falsifying logs, basically, which, as you can see on the far right side there, you got 7 plus 2, which means that it's a 7 out of severity. The severity of violations are 1 to 10, okay? And a falsifying log is a 7. So you don't want to get a 10. Those are the big ones, but a 7. So you got a 7. Plus you got 2. Why do you get 2? Because in the OOS, that stands for out of service. So this driver got put out of service. These drivers got put out of service. So not only did they falsify their logs and get the CSA scores dinged against the company, but now they're out. Now they're probably down for 10 hours. They have to do a full 10-hour reset. I've seen Sometimes they make them do a 34-hour reset, okay? If they're running really hard and they're up against a 70 and they've run over their 70, I've seen them have, like, they'll literally shut them down at the weigh station, put them on a service for 34 hours, okay? So you lose the time. That's the big thing. The driver loses money because he's stuck there now for a while, and you now have 9 points going against your CSA score, which is big. And the driver, these points will hit up against them too. And if the driver collects enough points, sometimes they will lose their license because of that. So it's a very big deal. A 9 point. So the one on the bottom there, he got 9 points for hour service, and then he had another issue, which was 3 points. So that was a 12-point stop against the company, which is a pretty big deal. That's a big deal. So that is why auditing logs is such an important part, because I understand drivers will make mistakes. That's fine. We're all human. But you need to have somebody watching the logs to make sure that if there is an issue, because the DOT can go back and look at the logs, if there is an issue, that it gets corrected, and it gets corrected quickly, because that is one thing that if a driver gets pulled into a scale or a driver gets pulled over on the road, one of the first things a DOT officer is going to do is they're going to ask to see the logbook. And if the driver's logbook is not good, then he's going to have issues like these are here. So anyways, that is how to audit a log. That's kind of the process I go through. Obviously, there's, if you have a lot of trucks, it can be kind of a long process, kind of a tedious process, but it is a very necessary process as well. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And make sure you audit those logs. And if you do have questions about auditing logs, feel free to reach out to me, leave a comment, send me an email, whatever. I'd be more than happy to talk about it and help you out with that. So until next time, thank you very much.